Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I would like to welcome you to The Other Side of History. Now, in this talk, I would like to talk about something that happened during the reign of King James I of England. And it involved the Jesuits, and it was called the Gunpowder Plot. Now, if you have not heard my talk on King James I of England, I would encourage you to go back and to listen to that talk also. So before we get into the Gunpowder Plot and the Jesuit involvement, I would like to give you some history. King James I, his reign was over 3 kingdoms, and it was a period known as the Jacobean era. Now, the Jacobean era, it should not be confused with the Jacobins. Jacobean England, it was a time of cultural development in art, architecture, and literature. The Jacobins, they were a radical political faction that played a key role during the French Revolution. The Jacobean era was the time of William Shakespeare. I personally view William Shakespeare's playwrights to be Jesuit theater, where the influence of Jesuit thought is found. Now, Shakespeare's family had strong ties to Catholicism, and Catholic themes and sympathies, they are found in Shakespeare's plays. Jesuit drama was a key part of Jesuit education. And I believe that much of what is found in the theater today is Jesuit theater, and it teaches Jesuit values. Both the Jesuits and the Jesuit theater has continued through the centuries and has adapted over time. The Jesuit order, they solidified their position in the Roman Catholic Church during the Council of Trent, which ran from 1546 to 1563. The Council of Trent was convened with one great goal in mind, and that was how to stop the Protestant Reformation. The Jesuits would be the chief tools of Rome to undo and destroy every trace of Protestantism, wherever it was found. Protestantism does not realize how dangerous this secret society is. The Jesuits are not just Catholic priests. They are men of any profession and can assume any character. They are all educated men, and many having no outward badge by which to be recognized, they live in all societies. Napoleon Bonaparte, he made this statement about the Jesuits. He said, and I'm quoting, "The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is a general of an army, not the mere father abbot of a monastery. And the aim of this organization is power. Power in its most despotic exercise, absolute power, universal power, power to control the world by the volition of a single man. Jesuitism is the most absolute of despotisms, and at the same time the greatest and most enormous of abuses. The general of the Jesuits insists on being master, sovereign, over the sovereign. Wherever the Jesuits are admitted, they will be masters, cost what it may. Their society is by nature dictatorial, and therefore it is the irreconcilable enemy of all constituted authority. Every act, every crime, however atrocious, is a meritorious work if committed to the interests of the Society of Jesus or the order of the general." End quote. Now this is from actually the general Montholon. It's in his book, Memorial of the Captivity of Napoleon at St. Helena. Now, this general, he was the French general who accompanied Napoleon into exile on St. Helena. He was Napoleon's aide, and he was his caretaker, and he stayed there with Napoleon until his death. Now, November 5 of 1605, there was a failed assassination attempt on King James I. That was called the Gunpowder Plot. There were 36 barrels of gunpowder put beneath the House of Lords for the purpose of blowing it up. It was a Catholic conspiracy to blow up King James I and Parliament. The plot was exposed by an anonymous letter which warned a Catholic member of Parliament of the plot. A search was made of the cellars, and Guy Fawkes, one of the plotters, was discovered guarding the gunpowder, and he was arrested. Providentially, the Gunpowder Plot, it was a failure, and today, November 5th, is celebrated with bonfires and fireworks. And then also the cellars beneath the House of Parliament, they are still searched before each state opening of Parliament. To Catholics, Guy Fawkes is seen as a martyr and a freedom fighter. Henry Garnett was the Jesuit Superior in England at this time, and he had ties with the Gunpowder Plot and the Gunpowder Plot conspirators. All of the plotters, they were devout Catholics, and the plot became known as Jesuit treason. Most of the plotters were in the end captured and executed for treason. Henry Garnett, the Jesuit Superior in England, he was himself caught, tried, and convicted of high treason, and then executed. The Jesuits and the Jesuit agendas, they cannot be underestimated. Some would like to remove blame from Henry Garnett and any real part that he had in the Gunpowder Plot. However, I personally believe that we would be horrified if we knew just how many assassinations and wars have been created by the Jesuit order. George Reimer, he spent 7 years in the Jesuit order. He said in his book, and it's titled The New Jesuits, that the Jesuits use as many disguises as only a king of the gypsies can assume. Dressed as only a king of the gypsies can assume. Dressed as painters, publishers, writers, and schoolmasters. If ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth and in hell, it is the Society of Loyolas, the Jesuits. End quote. J.A. Wylie was a Scottish historian and a Presbyterian minister, and he was famous for writing the history of Protestantism, which is 3 large volumes. The volumes contain 24 individual books that trace Protestant history from early Christianity to the late 17th century. Wylie said of the Jesuits, "There was no disguise that they could not assume, and therefore there was no place into which they could not penetrate. They could enter unheard the closet of the monarch or the cabinet of the statesman. They could sit unseen in convocation or general assembly and mingle unsuspected in the deliberations and debates. There was no tongue they could not speak, and no creed they could not profess. And thus there was no people among whom they might not sojourn, and no church whose membership they might not enter, and whose functions they might not discharge. They could execrate the Pope with the Lutheran, and swear the solemn league with the Covenanter." End quote. Now there were assassination attempts on King James I because he was Protestant. The hatred of Protestantism from Catholics was also seen towards Queen Elizabeth I of England after she took the throne. Now Shepherd, in his book Babington Plot, which is a study of Jesuit intrigue in 16th century Britain, it says that Elizabeth wrote to the English ambassador in Rome to notify the people of her taking the throne of England. Now, she was informed by His Holiness that England was a servant of the Holy See, and that Elizabeth had no right to assume the crown without his permission. They attacked her as not being born in lawful wedlock, and that she could not reign over England. They told her to renounce all claims to the throne, to submit herself to the Pope, and he would treat her as tenderly as possible. However, if she refused his advice, he would not spare her. Because Queen Elizabeth I wisely rejected the assumed divine right of the papacy to rule over and control the throne of England, there were at least 5 attempts to assassinate her. The purpose of the Jesuits is to destroy every trace of Protestantism and its principles. That is religious freedom, republicanism, representative government, and an economy that is built around a strong middle class. Now, Nicolini, in his history of the Jesuits, he says, I cannot too much impress upon the minds of my readers that the Jesuits, by their very calling and by the very essence of their institution, are bound to seek by every means, right or wrong, the destruction of Protestantism. This is the condition of their existence, the duty they must fulfill or cease to be Jesuits. Accordingly, we find them in this evil dilemma. Either the Jesuits fulfill the duties of their calling or not. In the first instance, they must be considered as the bitterest enemies of the Protestant faith. In the second, as bad and unworthy priests, and in both cases, therefore, to be equally regarded with aversion and distrust. End quote. The Jesuits' goal is to rule the world, and Queen Elizabeth I and King James I of England, they stood in their way, and they had to be removed. That's why the assassination attempts. The monarchs of Europe and the Pope himself had Jesuits as their confessors. The plans and the plots, they were all alike known to them. The Jesuits, they amassed vast amounts of wealth, and this has allowed them to do pretty much whatever they choose to do. Although the Jesuits were banished from many Catholic nations of Europe, they never truly disappear. They only go underground. Now, Avro Manhattan, in his book Murder in the Vatican, he said that Pope Clement XIII, he resisted the wishes of the Jesuit order. The Catholic monarchs of Europe insisted that the Jesuits be disbanded, and they threatened even the Pope. A day had been appointed for a public ceremony that announced the abolition of the Jesuits. But the night before, Pope Clement, and this is Pope Clement XIII, he was suddenly seized with convulsions and he died. The act of abolition of the Jesuits, it was left unperformed, and the Jesuits, they were victorious. It was said that the Pope had been made to die before he could publish the announcement of the official suppression of the Jesuit order. Protestants today, they are asleep. They no longer are protesting against the tyranny of the papacy. Protestants used to understand that the papacy was the Antichrist power that's found in the book Revelation. All of the Protestant reformers. They understood and they taught this. But how many Protestants today understand this Bible doctrine? Today, Protestants are looking for ways to say good things about the papacy. They have joined the ecumenical movement and are willing to sacrifice the teachings and principles that their churches once believed. To secure peace and unity, many are ready to sacrifice principle. This unity comes by compromising the truths that they know. Now, this degeneracy is strengthening the hands of the papal power. People today, they look to wealth, position, or honorary titles instead of purity of character and doctrine. For the same reason that Cain slew Abel, those who are throwing off the restraints of the Holy Spirit will desire to put to death the godly. This is why the Jews rejected Jesus Christ himself, because the purity and the holiness of his character was a constant rebuke to their selfishness and corruption. From the days of Christ until now, faithful Christians have excited the hatred and the opposition of those who love and follow the ways of sin. God permits the wicked to prosper and to reveal their enmity against him, that when they shall have filled up the measure of their iniquity, all may see his justice and mercy in their utter destruction. There is a day of judgment that is coming, a day of vengeance. All who have transgressed God's laws and have oppressed his people will meet the just recompense of their deeds. Every act of cruelty or injustice towards God's faithful people will be punished as though it was done to Christ himself. Why is there not the persecution towards Bible-believing Protestants today as there was in the past? The only answer can be that the religion which is current in our world today is not of the pure and holy character that marked the early Christian church. Protestants have a spirit of compromise with sin, and the great truths that were once understood are today indifferently regarded. There is little vital godliness in the Protestant churches today. If there was a revival of the faith and the power of the early church, the spirit of persecution, it would be revealed, and the fires of persecution would be rekindled. I think that as Protestants, it is a good thing for us to ask ourselves if we are being led by the God of heaven and the God of his word, the Bible, or rather the God, and that is little g, on his throne in Rome. The book of Revelation, and this is in Revelation chapter 17, it reveals that the papal system will have control over the leaders of our world, over the wealthy of the earth, and over the churches. Now the question is, where will you stand? As we look at these thoughts from history, they're not meant to be only informative, but it is meant to appeal to us as to the great controversy that's going on in our world today between good and evil, between Christ and Satan. And each one of us is going to have to choose one side or the other. And in truth, if we do not choose Christ and his word, we will be choosing Satan. So I want to thank each one of you for listening, and I'm wishing God's blessings to each one of you.